Thank you. It's always amazing to me how the how quickly we can burst into joyful communication. So afterwards, we always have on Sundays. For those of you who don't know, afterwards there's always coffee time, and almost always there's treats of some kind, other than just the treat of each other. And so please stick around afterwards. And I like to encourage people to make a point if you met someone this morning. For the first time, when we have the social time afterwards, if you're able to stay, go find them and then talk with them a little bit. One of the jewels of Buddhism, or one of the facets of the jewel of Buddhism, is known as Sangha. Many different ways to define Sangha, but in its essence, it's really those who follow the teachings of liberation. And so, at least today, you're following those teachings. So you qualify as Sangha, and we need to take refuge in each other. I'm struck more and more these days by how profoundly isolated we are, and just layer after layer after layer, in ways in which we have bought into the idea that I am living out a life on my own, and Buddhism says that in fact that is not true. It's just sort of the basic tenet of Buddhism, that there is no isolated self. There is no you which is disconnected from all the other things, all the other people, all the other, put anything in that space, that our living is not disconnected from that in any way. And that a lot of our problems, a lot of our suffering, our anxiousness, our lack of peace of mind, or our sometimes we say, like our dis-ease, is that we've bought into the idea of that isolation. And so a simple friendliness is quite a medicine for that, and also kind of challenge. Now, how often do you meet someone and you don't want anything from you? And I don't need to put up some big protection. I could just meet you very simply and share something in a simple way. That's a lot of the support that a Sangha provides for us. Okay, so that's my rah-rah speech about caring about each other. So this is the third week that I'm talking on this theme of the gate of not two, or there are not two gates. And I presented three different ways to read these three characters in Chinese, which are the character for no, the character for two, and the character for gate. And I've mentioned each time that one of the beautiful things about Chinese is that it's not always obvious how it is that you will read characters, what their relationship with each other are. And so there's this wonderful quality that comes out in Chinese where you're playing with the ambiguity of the relationship of those characters to find different layers of meaning. We have the same thing in English. It's a little more complicated in English. We have a lot more complexity. A lot of articles. Is it a book or the book, for example? Is it a teaching or the teaching? The one that people really, I always find this one true. Is it a truth or the truth? What does truth even mean if it's a truth? Or do we give up, or do we have the idea that there could be many truths? What does that mean? So anyway, English carries a lot of that inside of itself all the time, but Chinese has this different quality. And so I titled the talks, and if you read in the bulletin or on the website, it would say there are not two gates. And I was explaining how important that reading has been for me. That this saying, not two gates, or there are not two gates, or the gate of not two, this was written on a plaque above where my teacher always sat at his temple. And so when I went to sit with him, I had to confront those three characters every day, and see him sitting there, and then join him sitting and asking this question: what does this mean, not two gates? And for me, it came at a very important, a pivotal time in my life where I was making some very big decisions about what I would do with my life, and was very helpful in that way. So the gate of not two, there are not two gates. And then last week I presented this way of reading, which is gates are not two. Gates are never two. In fact, what a gate means is not two-ness. There's a that side and there's a this side, but the fact of the gate is the manifestation of the inseparability of that side and this side. That for there to be a gate, you're defining something, there and here, but that there's no here without the there or the there with the here. That's what we could say a gate is. I'm very fond of the gateways that you'll often find in Japanese gardens, which have no walls, just a gate. There'll be a path and there's a gate, and you come up across it and you see like, oh, well, I could just go around this way, I could go around this way, or I could go through the gate. Right? And the gate's inviting you. It's not protecting something exactly. It's inviting you to an understanding that there is inseparability between here and there, and yet there and here are not reducible to just the same place. And that's very important in this teaching. When we understand a spiritual gateway in that way, that it's a gate of not two, then we see that it really takes a very, well, it takes really putting our whole self on the line to be able to encounter that gateway. I was making the point that a great effort is necessary in the first talk. That if we just want to live out a life mired in here and there, everything split into two, grasping it, pushing it away, you don't have to really do that much to keep going in that. But once you keep going in that, you have to do stuff constantly. You're doing that duality all the time. And it takes a huge amount of effort to keep that going. But we don't realize the amount of effort that it's taking to do that. Because it's just become natural for us. And so the Buddha's analysis of that, or his diagnosis of that, was that that's why we're in such dis-ease. That's why we do not have peace of mind. It's why we're not settled, because we're constantly defending the ramparts of that palace in which the gate is on. And I know which side I need to be on to protect myself. Right? So if we want to investigate this gate that's like a gate in the middle of the garden that has no walls and yes, invites us from a here to a there, it's an invitation to give up the separate mind, the separate heart, the separating mind or the separating heart. And that invitation really does take a great effort, but it's not the effort of force. It's the effort of alignment, of attention, of care. And that actually takes a lot more than just working hard at something. And working hard at something is hard. By definition, right? Doesn't mean working hard at something. But you can work hard at something and be misaligned in such a way that you don't actually find your way through. Any of you who have worked with a good physical therapist before will know this principle in your body. Just strengthen that up, everything will be great. You know, strengthen it up, and then you cause a problem on the other side, right? You're working hard, but you don't really know the balance. You haven't really tuned in the totality of the thing. And so, of course, that's true on a material level, but it's true on every layer of our being, all the layers of our embodiment, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, subtle body, etc. And in this type of subtle gate, or hearing this invitation of this subtle gate, we're invited to a path of immeasurable merit. And so last week I was reading a little bit from the Diamond Sutra, which is one of the core teachings of the Zen school in particular, but is used throughout Mahayana Buddhism. And particularly this part in the fourth section, where the Buddha is explaining to Subhuti, he's saying, look, if you want to follow this path, if you want to hear and follow the invitation of this gateway, then this is what you need to do. He says, give a gift, practice generosity. But in that giving of a gift, in that practice of generosity, Do not abide in anything. Do not take your place in a sight, in a smell, in a taste, a touch, or an object of mind. Don't make your home in a feeling, an expectation, an idea of who you are, an idea of who it is that you're giving the gift to, an idea of what the gift is. He doesn't say you can't have any of those. He says don't abide in them. Don't make your home there. Because when you do that, then you're going to protect something and you're going to reject something else. If you can walk through the gate in that way, then there will be this immeasurable merit, he calls it. There will be this different kind of satisfaction than the satisfaction that you might be kind of reaching after if you're abiding in one of those things. And we talked a little bit about that last week. You know, if you really want the praise or the gratitude from someone and you're giving them a gift because you're really digging for the gratitude, how's that go? I mean, usually people smell it on you, and they might give you the gratitude, but in a way that's feels a little bit off. Even if they don't smell it on you and they're giving you really sincere gratitude, you'll doubt it because you're trying to grab that body of merit. And in the grabbing, there's already the nervousness about it. You see? Because you're trying to manufacture that experience or that situation. When in actuality, even though no one's totally pure in giving a gift, we're all abiding in all these different places. If you make it a practice to say, let me relinquish all these ways. Of course, I know I want that gratitude. I want that. I can feel that. But the Diamond Sutra is telling us, no, just go through the gate. The here and there is not so different. Don't beat yourself up about having that grasping, but simply walk through. Simply walk through that invitation that says there is a whole body here. And you're always not apart from it. And yet, on one side of the gate, you oftentimes feel like you're apart from it. But that is not even apart from it. Right? So please, that kind of teaching. So this gate of not to, this not to gates, we can see how it's very natural for us to create this here and there. That naturalness is not, it's not a problem that we do that. But the way we think about the there gets pretty tricky. Oftentimes the there, the other side of the gate, is really about our ideal or our fantasy in one way or another. What's that saying? The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. That dynamic is alive in us. And there's a good side to it. The good side to it is that it tells us there may be another way. So the way that we're doing things, or the way that our life is unfolding, or the way our community's unfolding, or the way our country's unfolding, whatever it is, we could say, we don't want to just be like fatalists, right? Like, well, this is the best we can do, so we just have to put up with it. That's not the message of Buddhism. It says there is a gateway to something else. But then what happens is we start dwelling in very quickly. What does it look like? What does the over there look like? And I want a very clear picture of it, or I want a clear feeling of it, or I want I'm given to the philosophical complexity and essence of the situation, right? So that's what I'll be thinking about. But everyone will have your own way. If you're a person who's more given to simple sensual pleasures, congratulations, that one's way easier to deal with. In the short term. In the long term, has some other kind of effect. We don't have to go into that too much. But you just see, like, okay, there's got to be some other kind of possibility here. But in the movement, if we grasp after, otherwise known as objectify, the ideal, the other opportunity, etc., that's on the other side of the gate, then whether we turn away from the gate or we go through the gate, we're making a mistake. Because we're buying into that grasped idea of what may be on the other side of the gate, as opposed to the actuality of the non-separation of where we are and what's on the other side of the gate. So the reason this is important is, as I talked about last week a little bit, that we're not just trying to have an experience of non-duality. There are many kinds of spiritual teachings which invite us into the kind of experience of non-duality. In Buddhism, that's called samadhi or concentration. And every one of you can have that experience. And that experience can be very helpful. It can help something happen because the way that you look at the world changes when you have an experience or a certain kind of concentration arises, which makes the world look different. It doesn't look like all those things out there and me over here. That's what happens in those concentrated states. But the reason those concentrations are able to do that is because they're not just about an experience. They're about an alignment. So when you sit in meditation and some measure of concentration arises, which isn't just spacing out or sleepiness, but it's also not that kind of divided mind, which is always pushing and pulling on things. You get a sense for that. There's an alignment that's happening in your being. The way you're seeing is changing, not just what you see is changing. And you're looking through that gate, and it starts to become hard to say which is which side. That's what's happening in the practice of meditation. And there's no way for you to split that into two and stand on the outside and look at the other half and say, yes, it's happening, or no, it's not happening. Okay? There's no way to do that. The reason I'm saying that is because oftentimes we say, well, am I doing that? Am I not doing that? How could I judge? What are the criteria? How could I go through all of that process to figure out whether that's happening or not happening in my meditation? Very natural to think all of those things, but you can't stand outside of it and assess it. All you can do is practice it. All you can do is come back to that gate that is inviting you. The gate will not yield to a secondary observer telling you whether you're going through the gate or not. It wants your whole being. Right? So all of that assessment, you got to dump it. And you got to come back to the practice, which, I'll remind you, again, is not just spacing out. But when you get rid of all of that capacity to judge, spacing out's one of the things that will come in with force. You know, if you don't really know how to rest, and then you come to some place of concentration within meditation, what will happen? And you may sleep anywhere from 30 seconds to 8 years. But actually in the sleeping you're learning something too. Okay, you're learning something because you didn't know how to rest. And actually when you come to a place of rest, other times that sleepiness can be covering up of something you don't want to pay attention to. Anyway, make sure to work with a teacher. So my point here is that alignment is important. That the gateway is not just about an opportunity. The gateway is about an alignment. And the alignment of the way that you're paying attention, the way you're caring for things, that's what you're being taught in that, not just what kind of particular experience you have. Hopefully experiences will oftentimes be joyful or kind of deeply nourishing, but they will also oftentimes be deeply difficult. They're of equal value. Now the reason I'm also bringing this up is because this there are not two gates, pushes us more in the direction of vow. The actualizing of that alignment that I'm talking about is vow. What am I going to take as the central value of this life, and how am I going to act it out? How am I going to take what I know of truth in the limited way that I understand it and kind of form it up into a ball and chuck it as far as I can, way beyond what I can see? and then go get it. That's what a vow is. Taking all of your spiritual energy and saying, I want to live out a life that's beyond what I could say what it is. But I know that's the direction. I know that's the gateway. I know that all this splitting things into two and trying to take one over the other is causing me and the world a problem. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to head in that direction as far as I can go. And when you get to the ball, or you think you've gotten to the ball, you pick it up, you chuck it again, right? That's what you're doing in the vow. So the Bodhisattva vows are the general vows that we take within the Mahayana. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless or immeasurable, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. You can see in the structure of each of those, there is a kind of dichotomy, but it's a dichotomy that's the gate. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. How do you free numberless beings? Go through the gate. And that kind of invitation is something that through Buddhist practice, through the recitation of those vows, through returning to those alignment, we can get a sense of where it is that I want to go. Or maybe it would be better to say the gate starts to appear. Now, I would argue that all of the real conviction, deep decisions, bold courses of action that bring us through a life are founded in this. That the kind of sacred commitments of our life can be the commitments of this Bodhisattva path. In fact, I think that's what we really want. If we enter into marriage, if we become a parent, all of us became a child. Depending on who you talk to, that might have been your choice. A vocation, joining of a religious order, many, many other things. Those are things that have been part of my life. So I'm just bringing them up. That all of those require the kind of seriousness of this deep alignment. And the gates that appear, this gate of not two, is also a gate of those kinds of sacred commitments. And it takes continual or consistent work, continuous, consistent work, to live out those kinds of vows. You know, it's a great joy in my life to be a parent and now a grandparent, which is, I wouldn't say it's more cool, but kind of it is. I think it's the whole phase thing. I don't think you want to go just straight to grandparent. You know, you want to be parent and grandparent. I think that's the sweet spot. But there's something that you know in that. There's a gateway that happens when you are entrusted with that life. I oftentimes think what made me an adult, I usually would say what made me a man, is the birth of our daughter Anzu. I was just 21. You know, some people go out a bit earlier, but that's early, pretty early. And I know some of you had similar experiences, but it was like there's a gateway there. For all of you who've encountered that gateway, you know what it is. And the gateway's offering you something. That your life is no longer yours. It's no longer yours alone. It's no longer yours as an isolated individual. Your life is your life, but now there's this gateway in which you see it being my life and it being not my life are not, they're completely not separate. Now, parenthood has a kind of finality to it. You can't ever undo being a parent. Some people run away and never see their kids again, but you've still encountered that gate. You may have turned away from the opportunity, may not. You may stay in relation, but not quite know how to go through the gate. I think most of us, we see the gate clearly sometimes, and then we do our best to come back to that gate and let it teach us and align us. And if we do that, that teaches and aligns our children. And so they know about that gate. So all of you know something about that gate, whether you're a parent or not, because you've been right there at the threshold of it as well. Other things don't have quite that same feeling to it, but I'd say they really are exactly the same thing. If you take up the gateway of vocation, for example, you may have many different jobs in your life. But what's the difference between a job and a vocation? Some people would say a vocation is something that you decide to do, you train for it, and it becomes your path to be in that vocation. And I think that's true. I think that's one way we should think about it. You're just sort of bopping along, I need some cash, so I'm going to do X, Y, or Z for a while, even if that's something that takes a lot of training and specialty or whatever. If you don't engage it as your vocation, it's not really a vocation. But many of those things we think of as a vocation take that kind of commitment. When I was a school teacher, that was definitely the case. As a priest, that's definitely the case. But I would say actually the more fundamental thing is about whether you encounter that gate of not to in the vocation or not. I love this about Japanese society. I lived in Japan for a long time, and there's many things I complain about Japanese society, but some things I really love. One of them is vocation. It doesn't matter what you do in that culture, you are really required to take it as a vocation. You don't get to say, I'm just doing this for now, so let me be kind of half-assed about it. That's not the way it goes. If you get in a taxi cab, most of the taxi drivers wear white gloves. Right? They're 100% serious about what they're doing. You go into, I remember when I was teaching English and I was in this tall building, and there's a fellow who's hired to basically watch over the building. It's like 8 or 9 story building, lots of different businesses in it. He sits there at the entrance to the underground parking, but that's not all he does. And I just love the way that he took his job 100% seriously. There was no sense like, I'm the janitor, so no. It was his vocation. It was his job. It's his responsibility. His responsibility to see that building, that place, those people, the people coming in and out of there, that was his gateway to giving up on this idea that my life is just kind of my isolated self, hawking myself a little bit for some cash. So I'm not saying that those gateways only appear with those kind of inseparable situations like being a parent. Really, they're appearing all the time. And how am I going to align myself? That becomes the question. The heavier things like parenthood are really great because, you could give up the job and maybe not think about it ever again. But if you become a parent, that's much more difficult to do. So I'm a big proponent of getting ourselves into trouble. Taking on commitments past our own capacity. And I guess my main point in this would be that specificity is necessary. This not to gate, or this gate of not to, is very easy to interpret as the gateway of fuzzy oneness. Like, I walk through the gate and it's like, hey man, it's all cool. Don't relax, just chill. Like that's, we don't need to fuss about things at all. That sort of spirit that we might have when we think about this indivisibility or this wholeness of things. I was just reading out on the board. I always stop and see what's posted on the board out here. And there was a very curious thing. I wonder what you would think about it. It's some kind of a program. I don't know who's running it. And I want to say, first of all, I don't think this is necessarily wrong what they're saying, but it struck me in a in a strange way. It said, everything you have oppressed is sacred. And there's some kind of workshop about working with the things that you've oppressed. So I basically believe that. I mean, but it's also everything is sacred. Like dog poo is sacred, right? So you don't necessarily want to roll around in dog poo, just because it's sacred. But I was very curious about this statement. And the reason is because we have a kind of spiritual vibe right now, which tells us that if we just open, that is what constitutes the spiritual path. That if there's anything that's kind of inside of us, kind of locked in there, that opening and getting that thing out is what will provide spiritual fulfillment. I'm not saying that unlocking some things inside of you and getting it out is not important, but I want you to go back to the dwelling in teaching that came in the Diamond Sutra. We build a sort of feeling set about what it's like to have that catharsis, and then the other side of the gate we conceive of as being the feeling of catharsis, and then now we dwell in catharsis as the way that we're trying to enact the spiritual thing. And that's not necessarily bad, but it is stuck. We will simply enact that cathartic thing again and again. In fact, we'll start making things, we'll start hiding things inside of us ourselves so that we can get them out. Right? I remember my best friend when I was in grade school, he loved to burp. So he would just swallow air all the time. It was really gross. I was like, Chris, would you stop that? But we do that, right? We're like, I'm going to make the thing that's inside of me so that I can get it out, because we have that sort of an idea. So this specificity is tricky, but what I'm saying here is the specificity should have to do with things, the gateways that authentically appear to you that are challenging. They're asking you to make a choice, or to make a choice not necessarily to do something different, but to do it differently, to believe in what it is that you're doing. If you're at a place where you haven't really made those choices, you have those choices to make. What am I going to do with my life? But if you're in a network of responsibility because you've made those choices, this path is not about ripping that all apart. It's about, how do I make the choice to do this as a gateway? And that kind of gate of not to is a real opportunity, but deeply challenging to our typical set of expectations. Well, that was a little meandering, but I hope helpful in some way. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about alignment, that part,
yeah.
A long time ago, when I was first sitting with another group, and I'd been planning to do that half of my life, was finally doing it.
Yeah.
And something happened, and I've never really had words, and I always referred to it as the gate. I don't even know if I knew anything about that or had read anything. I don't remember. And that became always the word that I used. And I wasn't ever able to say what changed. But it was definitely the gate, the gate. And so when you started talking about alignment, it was the first, I don't know if it still sounds silly to say the first time at this point, but it seemed that way, that everything did line up.
Yeah.
That's what had happened.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know that's what had happened. And nothing was the same.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
There's a story about spiritual practice, which is that if we practice hard, then we may align, and then we'll have an experience of the alignment, and then things will be different. That's not an untrue story, but it's a very kind of exoteric story. It's the kind of story you tell have people get a sense that there is a different possibility. Like, hey, there's a gateway in the garden. You should go check it out. It's that kind of a story. But there's another kind of story, which maybe we could say, we engage in spiritual practice diligently so that we may have the grace to notice the alignment. And when that happens, which is beyond our effort, then our spiritual life is informed by paying attention for that gate again and again, and knowing that we're oftentimes lost. But our effort then goes into a different thing than trying to define the gate or even to find the gate in the way that the first story feels like. It's more that I know that that gateway appears when a certain kind of relinquishment happens. When I relinquish the dwelling in these places which I very naturally dwell, and then this mysterious thing appears. And so I'm oftentimes telling people that alignment has happened for you and will continue to happen again and again and again and again. You have no closer or farther relationship with that because of some kind of spiritual accomplishment. What we could call spiritual accomplishment is developing the capacity to notice it and then to rely on it. And that second one, the relying on it, is a doozy, because oftentimes it's like sort of not typical, sort of asking you to do something that's not typical, sort of to give up on self-preservation or doing it in a way that will build up this, as opposed to invite everything through.
What just that?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think when I come to the gate and realize I can't change something, that my instinct is to just walk away from it instead of like sitting in the forbearance. And how would you recommend working with that staying?
Yeah. It sounds like you know.
Well, I know that I walk away, but that doesn't mean I stop walking away.
Yeah. So that practice of forbearance is really key. The key part, though, is when we talk about forbearance in the sense of a Buddhist practice, we talk about the liberation of forbearance. Oftentimes we think forbearance is like, if I could just sort of make myself hard enough, I could put up with it. And maybe we have to start there because something's telling me run away, run away, run away. I need to change this, so run away. So at first we're just kind of establishing, but very quickly we should move to the hardening, to the jabs, to the softening. And in that can be very, very difficult. But that is the forbearance which leads to liberation. If we are going to change that thing, it's not going to happen in this relationship. Like I've grasped it, I've demanded that if it doesn't change, I'm not going to go through the gate. Okay? It's not going to change through that process. But through forbearance, where the presencing with the difficulty continues, you should find amongst the difficulty of it this one place where you can stay. And it's like really only one, it's not even a place. It's like a very, well, the way I usually talk about this is it's like the edge of a sword or a knife. That edge is really not a place. It's like actually a disappearing of place. It's like if it was a ultimately sharp sword, it would be a forever diminishing line. Right? And that place is the only way that you'd be able to actually stay present with the difficulty if you're entering into the full scope of the difficulty. So that relinquishment is not just to kind of like become soft and or to become like unaffected by the difficulty that's there, but it's more, the softening is to find that place, that one point in which the difficulty will not knock you over. What I found is to find that sharpness, you gotta get knocked over a lot. And so you're facing it, you're facing the difficulty. This is kind of my imagery for it. And if you turn even a little bit, if it's a really hard thing, if it's a kind of neat thing, that won't happen. You'll feel the resistance. But if it's a really hard thing, you'll get thrown to the ground. And then the only way you can get up and face it again is to find, like, how do I face directly into this wind so that it doesn't knock me over? And that actually the difficulty of the wind becomes your teacher, because you can feel right away, oh, I'm going to get thrown down. And then you think, oh, I'll go this direction. And so you get thrown down that direction. And then facing right into the wind becomes possible. There's this beautiful saying, it's one of my favorite sayings in Buddhism, attributed to Nagarjuna, I think, originally, was a great teacher. He said, the ground that we fall down on is the ground on which we get up. And there's all kinds of layers to that. One of the layers I'm really particularly fond of is we do crash onto the reality of things, some of which we want to change. But then it's that very crashing against it which teaches us what is gravity and how does my body have to be aligned to not just crash against that reality, but to be in relationship with it. And so I quite like that way of thinking about it. We'll go left and right. We were right and left, right.
You had said something about, you had used parenthood as an example of those vows in our life where we realize very seriously that my life is not just my own. And the word that came to my mind immediately is the word sacrifice, which is such a complicated word for us, I think, as a modern society. And on the one hand, it's sort of also complicated because in this notion of the emptiness of the giver, the receiver, and gift, what could I possibly cut off from my life? And this whole conundrum. But I also feel that, and we've worked with this before, talked about this, that I see all kinds of people making lots of sacrifices for what they hope is their way to pass through this gate. And I'm curious if you could talk more about this word and how to hold it carefully, and how to practice with that idea that we may have to give something up.
That's why there are not two gates is such an important way to read this. Just to kind of give context to what you're asking, from my perspective, is that we do have to make choices. And choosing this will mean turning from this. Usually. Sometimes we can keep 2 or 3 things in the court, but it gets to 4 or 5 or 6, and it doesn't mean that you can't have anything to do with them, but they don't become that gateway in the same way that I'm talking about here, kind of life path type things. And so I would say the big trick is, if you think you're going to get away from something by performing a sacrifice and then doing the other thing, you're headed for trouble. So a lot of times that's the way people enter into a sacrificial kind of arrangement. I'm going to choose this very difficult thing to do so that I can kill the goat over here, and then all of those problems will go away because I'll be doing this. And then you'll start doing this and there'll be a bloody goat. That's how that goes. So we have to be really careful with that kind of mindset, that actually what we want to do in our choosing is not cutting into 2, but what sometimes people will play with the words, they'll say to cut into 1. So when you're making this choice, your whole being has to move, which includes all of the complexity and difficulty of these other things which you might not be choosing to do. And that is not a sacrifice in the way that we oftentimes think about sacrifice. It's actually the gaining of my wholeness. And that's something which I think particularly very difficult in our very wealthy, individualistically free social arrangement right now, which has lots of upsides. But one of the downsides is we're really losing the capacity to pass some things up, to say no. We have sort of sense that I should be able to do everything, and we just simply can't. We won't be able to enter into the inner truth of something if we're trying to do everything. But how to have that not be sacrifice, I think, that's why that term is really important. It may feel like a sacrifice in the sense that you're giving something up. You're saying, I will not do these things. So in that sense, it may feel like a sacrifice because you have to give them up to be able to do this other thing. But how wonderful that is. Those of you who have been in the gates of marriage, for example, whether it worked out long term or didn't work out long term, you say, look, I'm giving up the option. That's what it means to get married, right? I'm giving up the option that there's someone else. And that allows you to go into something that you won't be able to if you keep the option up. Same thing with the religious orders. You come into it and you make a choice. And in making that choice, when you became a monk, you chose, and there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, you still do tons of stuff. Maybe too many things. You made a choice, like there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't do because you're doing this. And sometimes that's very defined for us, like we have a certain requirement from our teacher if we're coming into religious vow or in matrimony or parenthood or certain kinds of vocations, etc. But really, no matter what we're doing, that guy who was the guard man for the building I was talking about, he had done that. He had put away a whole bunch of things to be able to do that. And I would say the majority of the things that he gave up and that we have to give up are their pride, all of this kind of self-clinging things. Those are the main things we have to give up. The outward things we give up are easy compared to those things. Yeah. That's my thoughts anyway. Probably time for one more question. It's on this side.
Oh, I have some
Yeah.
questions. I was thinking about what you were talking about in terms of like facing the wind kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I have a lot of baggage and a lot of shoving it down and avoiding it, and then part of my practice has been, and so like facing it and allowing it to come up and flow through me, and just thinking about like that duality and catharsis and getting addicted to the catharsis and this kind of opening process, and then that razor's edge of kind of not being attached to that, but and then thinking of reclaiming these parts of myself kind of that have been lost or and I've just been lately thinking about, I got a lot of fear of being taken advantage of, or like balance or fairness, that kind of thing. And I've been trying to choose on purpose, like generosity. It's like, I choose to just give this to this person instead of worrying about whether it's fair. Just choose, like, and then like what you're talking about, that freeing, I've felt so much less weight because I'm just like, and it's like I identified as a victim, and like before, letting go of my victimhood has given me empowered or choice or like that kind of thing. And can you talk about that? Like, because what you were talking about when Molly asked her question was like, I kept thinking that, wow, this seems like it might have a lot to do with like compassion and generosity as being that space. Exactly. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Boy, it's hard to add much to what you said because it's so right on. That thing which seems like infinitely narrow or infinitely sharp is actually the broad road of liberation. It's that kind of freedom that you experience when you practice generosity without abiding in all of those places that you might abide. Even though you may have the feelings about it, but you do what you were talking about. You purposely say, no, I'm just going to give this gift what that teaching says is you should dwell in this teaching, or you should dwell in this dharma, or you should dwell in this truth. So in that dwelling, it's a very, very sharp from one perspective, because you have to give up, you have to relinquish all of the things on these two sides that you want to grab onto and make it about yourself, or make it about getting rid of yourself, or whatever it is. And then actually at that, when you're concentrating on that sharpness, there's a way through, which includes your mistakes, includes all the ways you're abiding in different things. And that's what we're endeavoring to do in the practice. And that's what this gate of not to is inviting us to. And so will we take up that practice, or will we work with the alignment that comes from that gate? That's really the question. Another thing that kind of hangs out in the same territory in my mind with this is the mirror. So this is kind of image that you can work with, is the round mirror and the sword, the very sharp sword. These are old symbols within East Asian Buddhism, and they're really not a different thing, but they look like almost the opposite thing. The mirror, well, the reason we say it's round is because it has no edge. It's the edgeless mirror that reflects everything just as it is. Right? So that seems so broad. That seems like the opposite of sharp, right? It's just like whatever's there, it just reflects it just directly. It's very mutual, it's round, it's what we do when we're meeting each other, caring for each other all the time. And then this sword, which is this kind of total sharpness we've been talking about. Actually, the reflecting that the mirror is doing is that sharp. For there to be anything reflected in that mirror with the total clarity that that mirror reflects it in, it can only do that based on that level of sharpness. That if we carry the kind of physics metaphor out, every photon of light which hits that silvered glass or that polished metal has to be able to just get sent right back in exactly that totally sharp way. The reason I bring that up is because the kind of parts of us that need this round holding to be able to stay present with the difficulty, and the parts of us which need that precision, are not opposed. They're actually need each other. For either one to function, it needs that. So if we go too much into the kind of sharpness mode, sometimes we forget about the broad, and when we go too far into that broad reflective or holding, then we forget about the sharpness. And so we can use those two images as a way to remind us about how it is that we're facing the gate when that gate was difficult. Huh? The no-ki, exactly. Okay, well we have all summer to continue talking about this. I'm so excited.